So once again, we're still in the same book, The Reality of God by Stephen Hemler. This week sort of is in lockstep with last week's class. It is about creation, but it's about creation from the aspect of scientists and their view and how they perceive creation, as opposed to last week when we talked about the Bible. Okay, as always, our goal is, while using apologetics, to see things anew and then share it while realizing how much God loves each of us. And I think at the end of the presentation today, we'll see something that brings that to home. I know the morning audience really loved it. So you see up there Kirk Cameron. He was in a TV show, Growing Pains. He is devoutly and madly in love with God. He's an evangelist, an apologist. This talk he gives is actually on apologetics and evangelism and how they relate to each other. But he also, throughout the weeks, I've either had an authority talk about why we need to reinitiate apologetics, or as like last week, there was someone who gave a testimonial. So he's going to start out with his testimonial.
Let me give you a quick summary of how I came to Christ. I'm a recovering atheist. There was a time when I lost my blind faith in what other people told me in the science classroom, or what my friends told me. And I didn't have enough faith to hold on to this belief that there was no God. And I finally had to cave in and give in to the massive amount of evidence all around me and within me. I was 17 years old, and I was flying high. I was flying around the world as a celebrity on a show called Growing Pains, making lots of money, doing everything I wanted to do. I didn't have a care in the world. But at about 17 years old, I started asking questions like, is this all there is? I mean, I've made more money than my father has made in his whole lifetime as a school teacher, and here I'm making it within a year or two of just having fun being a goof-off on television. What else is there to look forward to? And I started asking questions like, what happens when you die? Do we just vanish and turn into nothing, or go back to being bacteria in the dirt? Or could there be something else? How did this universe get here? And I loved science. I wanted to know how life began and all these things. The answers I got to those questions weren't very satisfying. And then I met a girl who was an actress on Growing Pains. She did not later turn out to be my wife. That was another actress on Growing Pains who did, named Chelsea. But this girl invited me to go to church with her one weekend. And I was interested in getting to know her, so I thought I ought to go to church, or else I'd probably never meet her again, never see her. And so I went to church, sat in the back row with my arms folded as a proud, self-righteous atheist who knew better than to believe this silly man standing up at a pulpit with an old book in his hand that talked about an invisible being hiding behind a cloud, watching our every move. And I sat there, and he began to speak so intelligently. He captured my intellect. He spoke so eloquently, and he pricked my conscience with questions that he would ask. And he explained the gospel. He talked about an amazing, omnipotent, holy God. He explained that there is a heaven and there is a hell. He talked about the standard by which God would judge us one day when we died, and that all of us would be guilty because of sin.
So he brought out a lot of good points in such a short period. But what I really loved, without him actually saying it, is he showed the dance that pastor had between evangelism and apologetics. He said he captured his intellect, but then he also pricked his conscience, got him thinking in other ways. There is no one-size-fits-all. And I would argue, based on using apologetics and evangelistic methodology with people, that you can't just use one or the other, that it has to be a mixture. And actually, on a lot of occasions, it's kind of hard to see where the dividing line is. It's a dance between the two. So I put a little asterisk in front of not up there. This is to show that this is the beginning of the chapter in his book by that title, because I know a few of you have the book. And if you look, it says not revealed by evolutionary naturalism. And you see that ISM, that should always get your radar up. This gentleman, Stephen R. Hemler, believes in evolutionary naturalism, which I talked about last week, is just this side of deism, which means he's a scientist, he was an engineer, he wants to have one foot in the scientific community and say, hey, everything you're saying is correct, and he wants to have one side in his religious beliefs and say, everything over here is also totally correct. But there are places where they don't mesh, and he just sort of glosses over that. When you get into scientism, where you say science explains everything, where you can't even explain that sentence by science. So this whole idea of evolutionary naturalism, while he got the nil obstat imprimatur, still makes me feel a little uneasy. So many scientists, not all, are non-religious and tend to interpret evolution through non-religious lenses. Their paradigm is all scientific. There was a survey done a few years ago that reports about 60% of scientists don't believe in God or say they do not believe in God. Even the 40% that say they do believe in God are not allowed to bring their faith into the workplace. Now, of course, there's no Gestapo there telling them they can't mention God or talk to their coworker, but the problem is, once you start in your scientific endeavor, no more God talk. Not if you're a biologist, not if you're a cosmologist or what they call an astrophysicist. There's just no room for it. They want observable, empirical, logical answers for everything, and to them, God doesn't suffice any of those. So evolutionary biologists, and I'm not sure if you've heard of this man before, but he's an Oxford professor, I think emeritus now. He's an author, and he's touted as one of the four horsemen of the new atheists. His name's Richard Dawkins, and he's kind of the ringleader. He wrote a book called The God Delusion, and it spent weeks upon weeks upon weeks upon the New York Times bestsellers list, and it might have even gone past a year. I'm not sure, but he wrote in his book, where does that Darwinian evolution leave God? The kindest thing to say is that it leaves him with nothing to do and no achievements that might attract our praise, our worship, or our fear. Evolution is God's redundancy notice, his pink slip. But we have to go further. A complex creative intelligence with nothing to do is not just redundant. God is not dead. He was never alive in the first place. This is a book, this is a quote from a book that was on the New York Times bestseller list week after week, meaning people were buying it. People maybe were reading it. The statistics for how many people actually make it through a book they buy is pretty dismal, but just the idea that they would be interested to entertain what this gentleman had to say is scary. So Francis Crick, if you remember that name or not, he was the Nobel Prize-winning co-discoverer of the double helix structure of DNA. And he's quite an interesting fellow. He believes in something called transpermia. He believes that seeds came through space and landed on the earth and created those first microorganisms, and from there everything else grew. Later, because of scientific discoveries, he said, that's a little far-fetched. Now I believe an intelligent race sent those things to the planet. They didn't just fly through space of their own free will. So he's moved from just cosmic accident to actually higher intellect beings. And he wrote, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Now, I don't know about you. I'm a retired policeman and an investigator. When I read that statement, words just jump out at me. Why would you have to remind yourself, if you're a trained biologist, why would you constantly have to keep in mind what you see is not designed. To me, that begs the idea that it looks so designed that it fools you, and you have to keep reminding yourself, no, evolution, 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 even though we have no evidence for macroevolution. So the idea that they have to constantly remind themselves, I think, is evidence in and of itself.
Being able to properly use apologetics and present the gospel biblically is a knockout 1-2 punch for those the Lord is drawing to himself. And I want to talk with you about this because it's easy to make a mistake by majoring on one or the other, or using them inappropriately by not understanding what they are and what they do. So let's talk about balancing apologetics and the gospel. That was a long introduction, I know. Forgive me.
So he calls it a long introduction, and it was longer than that. I cut it down a few, but I think he said some important things there. While they do have two different names, he interchanges evangelism with the gospel. Evangelism is the invitation we give someone to come hear about the Lord. The gospel is when we share the good news. Apologetics is where we sort of take away those impediments, or we give them our reasoned answers. But what he said was these things can be used incorrectly. And it's one of the reasons the Catholic faith hasn't talked about apologetics for quite a while. It got to a point where it was always about debates, and it was always about me beating you. It was always about me being smarter than you. It was about me making you look less intelligent. And I don't know about you, but after I did that to someone and then said, will you please come join me at church? I don't know that people would feel comfortable doing that, or would even want to be a part of that church if that's what it has to offer. So it got a bad name. It left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. And after the Age of Enlightenment and our split with our Protestant brothers and sisters, we didn't want to offend anybody. And sadly, the pendulum has gone so far the other way that we don't want to say anything that seems intolerant or might ruffle someone's feathers. So Cardinal Schönborn, I brought him up before. He is the editor of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Pope St. John Paul asked him to be the editor and actually to write major parts of it. He cited in one of his own writings titled First Things, we must re-examine the genuine science at work in Darwin's theory and its developments, and begin to separate it from ideological and worldview-oriented elements that are foreign to science. Modern evolutionary theory must be freed from its ideological shackles. So he's pointing out something here very important that we can never lose the distinction of. We're not opposed to science. We support science. Scientism, this ideological shackle that everything has to be linked to science or it just isn't true, is something that we always have to be on guard for. So he's pointed out that Darwinism is fine. It's this idea that we're limited by this random chance and no place for God at the table. So the general worldview within the scientific and academic communities is that the material world of nature, meaning matter and energy, space and time, encompasses the whole of reality. They've got away from using scientism because when you say scientism or science proves everything, then you ask them to prove that statement, and they can't prove it scientifically. So they've gone to calling it materialism or naturalism, and this philosophical belief that nature is all there is, and I put Carl Sagan's name behind it because he used to have that show, and in the very beginning opening credits he said, the cosmos is all there is, all there was, and all there ever will be. Sadly, he's passed away, or we could show him, we now know that's not true, because even scientists and people in scientism have found more things that, even if they're not theological, wouldn't bode too well for Carl Sagan's comment. Scientism, as I said, is self-refuting. It's not a term that's used anymore, but it's replaced by naturalism, materialism. There's other isms, but the whole idea is if you see those three little letters, ISM, your radar should go up, your gut should feel a little funny, and you should start asking yourself questions.
You ever been dealt one of those? How could a loving God allow so much suffering in the world? You say there's one way to heaven? You are so intolerant. Hell? I would rather go to hell than spend eternity with your megalomaniacal tyrant in the Bible. Have you ever heard things like this? The Bible's full of mistakes. Christians are hypocrites. These are polemics. And I'll just tell you right now, most of this is trash talk. They're empty words. There's not much behind them. Just a lot of emotion. But some can be genuine, sincere questions and objections. And you have to learn how to distinguish between the two. And here's some ways that we can respond to harsh arguments like that. I've learned a lot of these from Ray, from Mark Spence. I've learned these from Greg Kokel and other guys who are so skilled at apologetics. And one of the things that they understand is that, again, Jesus called us to win people, not arguments. As this author also said in his article, we're called to be focused not on winning, but on being winsome and drawing people to the Savior. And we need to do that even with our argumentation.
So in each of these little snippets, there's pure gold in there. One of the things that jumped out at me is when he says some people throw those challenges at you because they want to argue, to debate, to use polemics, as he used the term, to fight with you. But I've found by having this game called Stump the Chump with the 8th graders, it almost gives them this excitement to ask questions that I think under other circumstances they might not ask. And the reason they ask it, number one, they want to be funny for their peers, but number two, it's because they really want to know the answer. They're not asking just because they want to see me falter, which maybe sometimes they do, but I've always promised them I'll find the answer if I don't know it, and I don't always know it. But the idea that they have a safe place to ask, and that we realize when some people are being aggressive like that, or even appear to be aggressive, there might be the underlying thing there that they just want to know the answer, and they're hoping you have it. So these next few screenshots are from Wikipedia, so you have it from the highest authority that these are gospel and true, because nothing on Wikipedia is wrong. So I pulled up science from the Latin scientia, meaning knowledge. It's a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. Next, there's no scholarly consensus over what precisely constitutes a religion. It may be defined as a cultural system of designated behaviors and practices, worldviews, texts, sanctified places, prophecies, ethics, or organizations that claim to relate humanity to the supernatural, the transcendental, or spiritual elements. Yeah. The context of religion, just in terms of faith. It gives us a confidence or trust in a particular system of religious beliefs within which faith may equate to confidence based on some perceived degree of warrant. And the reason warrant's in a different color and underline is for two reasons. Number one, it's one of those links you could click on if you're on your computer and it'd take you to another definition. But warrant, if something's warranted, it means that it has some basis in truth. It has some basis in fact. You are warranted in believing that. Our faith over 2,000 years has had reasonable answers for every question we could possibly think of. St. Thomas Aquinas devoted a lot of his life to putting these answers down. Just the idea that they're repackaged. It says in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. None of these questions that people are coming up with are really new. They just have a new wrapping paper on them. So the reason I have these 3 slides in a row is I wanted to show that the one on religion and faith didn't have any of the same words as the one for the science definition and vice versa. So I never want to give the impression that we're at odds with science or that science should be at odds with us. We have two different jobs, and we even have scientific communities within our church that do both jobs, and they do it well. They keep it separate, to their credit.
This is hard work, witnessing. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of studying to know answers to questions and to correct people and encourage the body. Why do we even bother? I mean, I know people are going to hell, but give me another reason. I don't mean to. Give me the reason why we take the time to give reasons for why we believe what we believe. Because we care. Thank you, brother. We care. And we love God, right? Because God made us. And we love people. And we love God because we're Christians. That's why. It's not some game that we want to have notches on an evangelistic belt and get people saved. I wasn't being facetious earlier. There's wrong motives for sharing the gospel. Evangelistic notches on your belt, a sense of pride at what you've accomplished for the sake of the kingdom.
More and more important ideas there. It very much can turn into an apologetics, into someone rising to the idea that they're the authority figure. And I think the medicine to keep that from happening is to always transition into the good news, to evangelism, to talking about, okay, this is what we've removed, this is what we've cleared up, but now that we have, where are we going with it? You know, apologetics can only get you so far. It's like the key that helps unlock the door. But this idea that we win, or we get a notch on our belt, or any of those things. And he said, why do we do this other than hell? I don't know about you, but that is a big part of why I do it. I want to see our young adults stay in the church. I'd be happy if they even stayed in the faith. We heard Cardinal Dolan talk about how the one young son went from the Catholic Church to a Protestant church with his roommate, and I thought, wow, that's almost a success story, because nowadays we hear that they just totally dropped off the face of the earth. So it is vitally important that we don't go down that same road of apologetics where we're clubbing people over the head with our superior intellect and knowledge. So in regards to the cross-cultural appearance of belief, Dawkins, that same Oxford professor who wrote The God Delusion, admits that no known culture lacks some version of the time-consuming, wealth-consuming, hostility-provoking rituals and anti-factual, counterproductive fantasies of religion. I mean, he's a swell guy. Number one, he's an evolutionary biologist, so why he's getting into evolutionary sociology, I don't know. I think it's only to add more kindling to the fire and do more baffling with our young, these people that we entrust to college professors. But I'm getting the impression he doesn't hold a very high opinion of people who believe in religion and isn't afraid to tell us that. Okay, we have something called the UCAT, the Youth Catechism of the Catholic Church. It isn't necessarily put out by the church in the same way the Catechism of the Catholic Church was, but each country is allowed to adopt it, and the USCCB in America said, sure, we'll give it the nil obstat nem primatur. It means that you don't have to believe everything that's in there, but it doesn't interfere with doctrine or morals. So question 42 in the UCAT states, natural sciences cannot dogmatically rule out the possibility that there are purposeful designs in creation. The UCAT goes on further to read, and this is probably even more important, a Christian can accept the theory of evolution as a helpful explanatory model, provided he or she does not fall into the heresy of evolutionism, which views man as a random product of biological processes. Once again, that God of chance in science, that word that we bring out every time we don't know all the factors, but it is not a random process. Our catechism tells us at one point God puts a soul into each and every individual. So this heresy of evolutionism that we're just here from blind chance does not coincide with what the church teaches. Also, Pope St. John Paul stated in a General Assembly in 86, indeed, the theory of natural evolution, understood in the sense that it does not exclude divine causality, meaning God being a part of the mix, is not in principle opposed to the truth about the creation of the visible world, as presented in the book of Genesis. And anyone who goes along these lines for any length of time in apologetics will find, amazingly, that science and the book of Genesis fall in lockstep. Genesis was never meant to be a science book, but the fact that it's in scientific order is still mind-boggling to me.
All right, what is an apologetic? What is an apologetic? Somebody give me a definition for that.
Defender of the faith.
A defender of the faith? That would be an apologist, yes. What is an apologetic? Okay, how about you? An explanation for the reason for what you believe or why you believe. Good. Yes. An argument. Yes. Evidence. Evidence. A reasoned defense of your belief. In 1 Peter 3:15, we say, we read here, always be ready to give a reason, a defense for the hope that is within you. That's the verse we often look at, and it's talking about being able to explain humbly, thoughtfully, gently, clearly, and biblically why you hope in Jesus. Why you hope in Jesus. Let me ask you a question. Can you do that? Can you explain why you have a hope in Jesus Christ? Do you know why you have a hope in Jesus Christ? You could explain that to me. Even if you don't think you're a great apologist, you could explain that to me. I think, if you can, you're well on your way to being able to use apologetics effectively. Now, the basis for this command to give a reason for your, or a defense assumes that you have a reason. That you can say, I'm totally convinced and persuaded of what I believe. And I know why. I've answered my questions. I've drugged the skeletons out of my own closet, and I've gone to someone and I've asked these questions, or I've come before the Lord and I've been convinced where I once was doubtful. And now you know, and you can explain that to somebody. If you're not sure and confident why you believe, you're not going to be very effective trying to convince others. One of the things that apologetics does is it builds up the believers. Apologetics built me up in a huge way. Doesn't it build you up when you watch debates and see skilled apologists just tear down arguments that exalt themselves over Christ or attempt to? I mean, it encourages me. It builds me up. It shows me that where I haven't had an answer, there is an answer. And it encourages me. It's a tremendous help for the Christian to resolve his own doubts and fears. It rids you of the paralyzing fear that there's no intelligent basis for what you believe, that you just have blind faith. No, it shows you that that's not the case at all.
So we brought up that hyphenated word, blind faith. That's something that the Catholic religion has never professed or been about. In light of the Enlightenment and our schism with the Protestant brothers and sisters in not wanting to offend people, Cardinal Avery Dulles has said that we constantly swing between faith alone and reason alone, and Bishop Robert Barron tells us right now we're all the way at the end where we're faith alone, and you'll even hear it like, my faith is strong, I know why I'm a Catholic, no one's going to knock me off of that pedestal, so I'm good. I understand why you're doing this and it's a good thing, but I mean, I'm good where I'm at. Well, 1 Peter 3:15 is a command in the Bible. And it says we're supposed to have a ready response to someone else, to anyone who wants to ask us why our faith is legitimate. So if someone comes up to me and says, I hear you guys call your priest father, but it says, I think in Hebrews, you shall call no man father. Why do you guys do that? It's a tough question, and they've got many a college kid or high school kid confused about that. And then if you go home and ask someone, they might not know. And there's a legitimate answer for it. And I'll keep you in suspense for a little while. But all these things have legitimate answers, and never is it okay to say, hey, my faith's okay, so I'm good. Because then how can you be an evangelist? As baptized Christians, as baptized Catholics, we're called to all be evangelists. But here's something we've forgotten. And he brings this up a little bit in here without realizing it. When we're in fact confirmed, some of you might remember, we're called to be spiritual warriors. Matter of fact, the bishop a long time ago used to give you a little smack on the face after he did all the chrism and stuff. They don't do that anymore. But that little strike was to let you know, hey, you're an adult now in the eyes of the church and you're supposed to stand up and be a warrior. So when you're born and you're baptized into the faith, you are meant to be an evangelist. And when you become a man or a woman in the eyes of the church, you're meant to be an apologist. And we've lost that. And it's something that Bishop Barron, Avery Dulles, Cardinal Dolan, many people, the swing, even Fulton Sheen, he was the start of it. You can hear it in his teachings. So to the question of whether religion contributes to a more healthy life, our friend Professor Dawkins has something else to say. Dawkins finds it hard to believe that health is improved by a semi-permanent state of a morbid guilt suffered by a Roman Catholic, possessed of normal human frailty and less than normal intelligence. So if you'll each turn to your left, to your right, and if there's a Catholic next to you, look at them and know when it came to intelligence, they were in the shallow end of the pond, according to Mr. Dawkins. And he would know because he's a biologist. He studies this stuff. So our DNA must in some way be inferior as Catholics. Not quite sure how he can profess that universally, but he does in his book, The God Delusion. Francis Collins, if people don't know who he is, he's the director of the National Institutes, there's more than one, of health. And he's the former head of the Human Genome Project, which was around the world. It was the mapping of the human genome so that we could see on what alleles and what little areas of our DNA different traits were. They really thought it would be the holy grail. It hasn't turned out to be exactly as easy as they thought. They've mapped it, but now what do we do with it? I know they're trying to do some scary stuff with it, but this gentleman is a Christian, but like our author of this book, Mr. Hemler, he's one of those guys who's an evolutionary, he believes in evolutionary naturalism. So you can almost hear it in some of his words here. If God is outside of nature, which would be like pantheism, if you've ever seen the movie Avatar, where they believe in all those sprites and fairies and magic live in the trees, then God is outside of space and time as well. In that context, God could, in the moment of creation of the universe, also know every detail of the future, and I'm betting he did. In that context, evolution could appear to us as driven by chance, but from God's perspective, the outcome would have been entirely specified. I think that's a pretty sure bet as well. But if you read in between the lines, he's trying to say that God sort of front-loaded the Big Bang, and then he just stood around and watched it. He didn't leave like the deists believe, but he's trying to stand one foot once again with the scientists and one with the Christians, and it's just not quite possible. And I think that's why a lot of school districts and states would like to get intelligent design into their science books, just to give an alternative. So, citing Cardinal Schönborn again, the one who wrote the catechism or was the editor, this time he had something in the New York Times. Any system of thought that denies or seeks to explain away the overwhelming evidence for design in biology is ideology, not science. It's a belief system. It means science has been hijacked. And if you start to hear those buzzwords that, science disproves God, or prove there is no God, or proves everything so well in and of itself that you don't need God, then you know you're dealing with scientism and not science. Oops.
There's another motive that we can have in sharing the gospel that I've experienced, with apologetics, and that is fear. I have been motivated by fear to answer people's questions because I'm afraid that if I didn't, I would look stupid. Or I was afraid that this person might be right and that I need to shut him up before he confirms my worst nightmare. Have you ever felt that way? And it's closed you up about sharing your faith. And what I want to suggest to you is that the proper motivation is that we care. It's compassion. It's love. It's love for God and it's love for people. And if you don't know an answer to a question, don't let fear shut you down. Learn the answers. There's a plethora of material out there on the internet and in books to learn how to properly argue against false worldviews. Some people like to sort of pit the two against each other and say, well, one is about faith and the other is about reason. It's sort of a faith versus reason thing. And I'm kind of a scientific person, so I need arguments. That's how I'm going to decide what I believe. And other people, they're just faith people. The truth is, faith and reason are friends. Remember one time Ray and I debated a couple of atheists who were pretending that God did not exist on national television. And at the end of our pre-debate talk, I said to this one young man, hey, listen, we're going on national television. We're going to be in front of about 10 million people on ABC. And I've been doing this for 20 years, getting in front of big crowds of people, and I'm even nervous. So I just want to tell you, if you're nervous, that's okay. Just know I'll be praying for you. And he said to me, oh, that's great. You pray for me, and I'll think for you. Being able to use apologetics skillfully also gives the sinner faith in you. That you're not just a crackpot who puts his blind faith into any old fairy tale. It gives him faith that you're a thinking person, that you've thought through these issues, you've asked these questions, and that you have searched out good answers. Apologetics do that very nicely.
So he brought up many more good points. There's a lot of gold in all this, but in the beginning he talked about fear being the motivation. I have a few friends that are Catholic school teachers. This one teacher I'm thinking of specifically is not a religion teacher. She says she has a sister-in-law who's a Southern Baptist. And she said every time they talk about their faith, she gets stymied, she gets stuck. She loves her faith, her Catholic faith, isn't quite sure what to say, and she says on the way home, every time I'm crying. I just don't know how to answer back. And there are certain denominations that are better at apologetics. I would have to say Southern Baptists, they're some of the best. We had a gentleman that I went through, I was helping with RCIA, and he was in the day class. And he said, oh yeah, from the time I was like 8 years old, they were drumming this into us. I could tear a Catholic apart by the time I was 10. And it's true. It's true. They'll really make you think, and they'll make you feel flustered and unsure. But to the last point Cameron made, or Kirk made, this idea that when you have the ready answers, not only do you feel buoyed by your faith, but you do instill that into the person you're talking to, because I know for sure some of the questions when we play Stump the Chump come from a legitimate place. It's a legitimate question they have. But I also know they're so hoping that I have an intelligent answer, because this is what they grew up with, and they don't want to look at everybody like, all these adults believe in a fairy tale. What is this? And then later in life have nothing, no anchor in life, no religion to cling on to. So this idea that we can give them the answers and that they're intellectually sound is a gift that I don't think we can ever pass on. So there's an asterisk in front of found, because we've now turned a corner into the next chapter, if you have the book. And he starts talking about layered explanations. And a layered explanation means that things can be explained by multiple levels of understanding in a plurality of compatible explanations. And we know this. Our Catechism of the Catholic Church says there's 4 ways we can read our Bible. The literal or historical way. We can see the analogies that are in there. We can also look at it from a moral standpoint. What moral things is Jesus trying to teach us in those parables? And lastly, a fancy word, anagologically. And all that really means is, what in this book is going to help me get to heaven? So we have 4 different ways of reading the same story and getting something out of it, not to mention where we're at in our life. Because I don't know about you, but I can hear a gospel 3 years later when it comes back up and go, I don't remember ever hearing that part of it before, because it has new meaning because I'm in a new place in my life. So, an example of this layered explanation. My wife walks into the kitchen and I'm boiling a pot of water. And she says, Shane, what's going on here? Why is the water boiling? And in my superior intellect, I say, well, it's boiling because the heat on the bottom of the copper excites the molecules in the water, and they start spinning faster and faster and spreading out, and then the water roils, and then it boils. And that's why at about 212 degrees, that's why it's boiling. And she goes, no, really? And I go, I just want to make some spaghetti. So you see, there's always more than one way to answer a question, and science is great at telling us how, but not always great at telling us why. Same thing with a car. You could ask the explanation from your friend about this Ford F-150, and I put 68 after that because that's how long that model's been in existence. It's the second longest model in the United States in terms of cars. I didn't know that. But you could either say combustion engine, sucks in gas, bang with the spark plug, that sort of thing. Or you could say, I don't know, Henry Ford. There's always more than one reason for something. short video. That's Aristotle's four ways, so that even predates Christ. These Greek philosophers were very intelligent, and somehow we've lost that idea that there's more than one way to tell a story, at least when it comes to science. And sure, a scientist could put that omelet in a test tube and use specific gravity and find out exactly what ingredients were in there. I don't see that as the point. You could just ask them. Or you could have some sociologist come along and say, well, they want to spend time together, so they share a meal. Or aliens come and look and they say, well, that's sustenance. But you're never going to know the reason why. Just like with God, we don't know all the reasons why. But with him, he might have been home from college and he wanted to share breakfast with his family, and he wanted to make it because he was home for the weekend. It's things like that. Like, why are we here? What is our purpose? Why is there something rather than nothing? Those are things that only our faith and God can ultimately answer. So when we let scientism hijack our world, we get cheated out of a lot of answers. So we must remember evolutionary naturalism, and there's those three letters again, ISM, seeks to understand the details of how life evolved. But evolutionary naturalism cannot address the big picture of who caused the evolution to occur or why we're here. And typically, I end these sessions by usually having a quote or something like that, and then I have a cute little ending, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, whatever it is. But this week, I wanted to end it a little differently. A very loving, kind, and supportive friend sent me the title of a song on Thursday. It was his day off, and he heard a song, and he said it made him think of me and what he thinks I'm trying to accomplish with you and what you're trying to accomplish being here, and he's not even been a part of this. So I would just ask you to try to look at this video that's coming up and ask yourself, how do I see this differently than before I started this 5 weeks ago? Now it's going to take a little imagination, because who can really do that, but try to ask your old self if you see something new here. Oh. And the answer to that question starts with, it's to know, love, and serve God. I'm sure we all remember that one.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of life. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. And if the stars were made to worship so loud, I can see your heart in everything you made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. And if creation sings your praises, so will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. When as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. And if it all reveals what nature's so alive, I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. And if creation still obeys you, so will I. So will I. So will I. If the stars are made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. And if the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. And if the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion God of salvation, chase down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. And if you left the grave behind you, so will I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I can see your heart in a billion different ways. Every precious one, a child you died to save. And if you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
So once again, each week I've reiterated that I hope we see how much God loves us. I think in something like that we can see it, but I can also tell you that there are people out there that love us and think about us even when they're not here, because the friend who sent me that was Father Ron. And he said he had been thinking of all of us while we were doing this, not even being a part of it. He thought maybe this was what we were trying to accomplish here. So thank you, Father Ron.